Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kentico Xperience Connection event. Thank you for joining my session, which is titled High Availability with Azure for Kentico Xperience Websites. I'm Brian McKeiver, and I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank the presenters and organizers of the conference for joining, and even the sponsors. I want to thank them too. I've been a part of this event for 10 years now. This is my 10th time speaking at the event. And it is a fantastic event. It's probably the best event of the year when it comes to Kentico Xperience and DXPs in general. So my enthusiasm is here. I hope to make this as exciting as I can for you because it is a very technical topic, but I will do my best. So as I said, I am Brian McKeiver. I'm co-owner at Bizstream. We are a digital agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a great place to be in the summer, but not in the winter. Trust me, it's a little cold right now. My background is technical. I'm a computer programmer by trade, but over the last almost 20 years, I've developed a lot of different websites and platforms and solutions for our clients across North America, and that I've done a lot with Kentico Xperience. And for that experience, I'm recognized as a Kentico Xperience MVP, a Kentico Content MVP, and recently I was announced as a Microsoft Azure MVP. So you can imagine, when you put all three things together like that, that's kind of where the idea for the talk came from. It's basically what I do a lot with my day-to-day job. I help our clients move to Azure, use the best practices when it comes to both Kentico Xperience and Azure to host and deploy and deliver those solutions and make sure that they're highly resilient and performant and scalable. So I'm very passionate about that, and that's where I spend a lot of my time, which is where some of these titles come from. But as I mentioned, we are a gold partner at Bizstream. We've been doing this with Kentico for, almost 12 years now, if not even a little bit longer than that. And we've had a reputation in the past of being a little bit of a technical shop only or development shop only. But last year and a half, we've kind of expanded our capabilities and services, brought on some new talent, and now we offer basically a full service solution. So whether it comes to strategy, design, content, creative, analytics, we're able to provide all of that. And I'm very excited for the future of Bizstream because Kentico Xperience plays a big part of that. So if you're looking for a partner, maybe you should check us out. And you can do that on our website. I won't talk any more about Bizstream from this point on, though, because we're here today to talk about Azure and how we can best leverage and use that with Kentico Xperience. And I have a lot of people that come to my desk or join Teams meetings with me, and they say, hey, Brian, how can I best get away from on-premise resources? How can I use cloud technologies? What's the best solution for me? Is it Azure? Is it AWS? Is it Google? Is it Rackspace? There's a lot of cloud options out there. And I generally answer it this way. AWS is a good cloud solution. We have plenty of projects that run there. So is Azure. Those are my two leading choices. I don't think Google Cloud or Rackspace makes as much sense when it comes to Kentico Xperience. But today, with the fact that Microsoft has made such an investment in the tools and technologies that go around working with Azure and Visual Studio and VS Code extensions, it's just so much easier to be in the Azure space, especially when I show you some of these things today that we're going to cover. So that's my main recommendation. In fact, it's really easy to get started. It's free. You can actually spin up many of these resources I'm going to show today completely for free in your first set of free credits. And you can go to Azure's website to do that. So don't be afraid of trying out Azure after you see this talk, maybe. And ultimately, why we're here is to talk about high availability, right? So I want to start out with the statement that uptime matters. As you can see, this well-known study or stat published by Gartner actually says that an IT downtime can equate to almost a cost of $5,600 per minute. And I double-checked that to make sure I'm saying that right, because that's a big number, right? It's actually $300,000 per hour for the average downtime across a lot of different organizational sizes, big enterprise to medium enterprise to maybe smaller company. So it's kind of an average. And honestly, the first time I heard that, I was like, oh, that's kind of high. That doesn't feel about right. But when you start to think about how it adds up, when there is a downtime, the product owner gets involved, the support team, maybe the network guy, the developer, maybe you have to pull people from vacations. It can get very expensive very fast for when a website goes down or when a project doesn't build or serve the customer the right way. And people scramble. There's the stress level, there's the frustration. So what if there was a way to get rid of some of those scenarios, or at least reduce them? Because honestly, anyone that promises you there's a 100% uptime guarantee on something in technology, in my opinion, they're basically lying. That's not a true statement. I've been doing this long enough to know that everything has problems at one point or another. It's just about how much you want to mitigate the risk for those problems. I mean, heck, even Azure has outages itself, and AWS, Netflix, Microsoft's website. They've spent a ton of money in making sure that they're up and available. But the question comes to, how do we then take this concept of high availability and making sure we have uptime to our own websites with Kentico Xperience? And I thought I would start with maybe what not to do. And there's two main points to this slide that I want to make. First, what I want people to forget about is maybe thinking of like a older solution to this that's been around for many years, maybe pre-cloud even, I'll call it. When the era looked like this, it's, hey, we need high availability, which means we automatically have to start thinking about procuring more equipment, whether that's servers, networking gear. Maybe we need to buy a load balancer. We have to get some experts in here to set that up. Oh man, what are we going to do at like the network level versus the OS level versus the application level? And they start thinking about all the hard things that they need to handle and maintain and purchase themselves, right? And maybe even make bad choices like having the Windows built-in software-based load balancer as opposed to a real load balancer, and all of a sudden the whole thing crashes and no matter what you do, it doesn't work. Okay, maybe I got a little personal there with some personal experience that actually happened to me. But generally, I want everyone to go into this with not thinking of old tactics or old techniques for high availability, and think about using the new tools that I'm going to go through today. So that's my first point. Don't just use an old strategy when it comes to high availability. The second point of moving and migrating to Azure that I see a ton of is people generally think that, oh, I have a server. It's got my Kentico site on it, and it's an IIS server. Maybe there's a database server in there or two, and I'm going to simply pick that up and virtualize it into the cloud. So I'm going to spin up a virtual machine in Azure, and I'll just repoint DNS, and everything's fine. Good, done. We're in the cloud, right? Well, that's not quite the best way to do it. And I'm here today to show a different way that doesn't involve virtual machines, because virtual machines are really infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. And yes, that is a way to do it. And there might be a couple good reasons where you have to still do that. But generally, that's not the most modern, easiest, or cost-effective way to do it these days. So with that, I'm going to get into what is. And I'm here to tell you that Azure Platform as a Service, or Azure PaaS, can come to our rescue. It's the perfect marriage for making a highly available Kentico Xperience website in Azure. And when I say Platform as a Service, maybe that's a little bit of a foreign term because it's not everyone kind of thinks that way. But think of it as very close to SaaS-based solutions like a Salesforce or Netflix or something. But it's one more layer of control that you own as opposed to someone else owning and maintaining for you. But it's still a lot different than running a server because there are a lot of benefits. There are many benefits to running a PaaS-based solution. And I'm not going to go through and read every point on this slide because you can read that yourself as I'm talking. But generally, there's a couple big ones. Number one is the ability to scale and perform at very high levels with very low effort or work. I mean, there's literally a button that says, do you want to scale up, which means give me more resources, like double my RAM and memory? And in 30 seconds after that thing recycles, you automatically have a bigger, more horsepower type of solution. There's ways to scale out, which triples the instances that you have of your Kentico site. There's just a ton of performance and scalability that comes with Azure PaaS that doesn't take any work compared to the other methods that I've talked about. Secondly to that, it's all about maintenance in a lot of people's worlds. If we don't have to have a virtual machine, there's no operating system to take care of. There's no patches, upgrades, hotfixes in the Windows environment, right? I don't have to worry about is IIS up to date and patched or the .NET framework. This is a serverless-based type of solution where you don't have a server to worry about. You don't have to worry about like an antivirus client or malware client or anti-malware client. That just isn't even a part of the equation. And to me, that's a big deal. Not having to worry about that, which basically translates into lower maintenance costs, lower resource availability. They have to worry about who's going to maintain and patch things. With Azure PaaS resources, that just isn't a concern. The Azure Cloud does that for you. And then there's a lot of these other benefits that we're talking about here, but I'm going to go kind of fast because really what we want to get into is how to actually do this. So instead of thinking about it with the old picture of the CRT monitor and the switches and the cables in the closet, here's the way you should think about it in your head. This is the way to visualize it. This is literally a picture of inside of an Azure PaaS container. It's in one of the data centers. There's around 100 or more of these around the world. Even some of them are underneath the ocean. And if something goes wrong with one of these things, Microsoft handles it for you. They literally can pick up all of the code and apps that are running in these things and move it to another one. And you don't even know about it. They just take care of that for you. And that's why there's so many of them around the world. And that's why it's so fast and performant around the world. And it's pretty cool to think of it that way. So enough about the theory. Let's get a little bit into how we would actually do this and how would we implement Azure PaaS for Kentico Xperience sites. And ultimately, let's get into how do we make that highly available so that we have a lot of uptime. And it starts with this. Here's the basic core components of Azure PaaS. On the left, we have what's called an Azure App Service Plan. An App Service Plan is your container that has resources tied to it in terms of computing power, RAM, CPU, disk space. It's kind of like a server, but not really. It's just the resources that you're purchasing and using. And you pay per tier of App Service Plan. There's free, basic, standard, premium. There's a ton of them. And you associate in your plan different app services. And that's what the two blue square type of icons represent. There's an app service, which if you're a developer, you can think of that as like your app pool or your code base even. And you deploy the Kentico admin project, the admin tool as the Pages application. You put that into one app service, and then you put your live site MVC core code into the other. So that's why we have it in the diagram. We have the admin tool and live site. Those two things are part of that plan. They share the resources. They get their own URLs, and that makes up the website code base. Again, you don't have to worry about the server. You're just deploying the code base to the app service. That then connects to the Azure SQL database, which is on the right-hand side of the diagram. Even though it says there's an Azure SQL server involved, it's still a serverless type of resource. You don't actually have to worry about managing a Windows server. You can simply provision a resource of type Azure SQL Server, which then you can have as many Azure SQL database catalogs inside of as you want. And again, you pay for the pricing tier and performance that you need for your implementation. And that then connects just like you would on your local workstation with a connection string from the app service code base to the database. And this is the basic core components of how you make Kentico work. That's the Kentico database that goes in the Azure SQL side. And it's the Kentico admin tool that goes in the app service. And then your code is still your code at the end of the day on the bottom portion. In theory, if you were to do these three things, that would be all you need to do to have your website running in Azure PaaS. It'd be an app service plan with app services and a database. And that would be great. This might be enough to stop for some people. In fact, we have some clients who actually only go to this level. They still get all the benefits I mentioned, plus a few others I haven't mentioned yet, of being an Azure PaaS, but this isn't quite highly available, and it's not quite scalable yet. So how do we do that? And that involves a couple more components. So I'm going to move the diagram up a little bit, and we're going to talk about the bottom portion. The top portion remains. We still have the app service plan and the SQL database in Azure SQL. But now we're adding a couple components that support scalability. And the bottom two on the left are really the most important here. The first is what's called an Azure Redis cache. That's a resource that's basically like memory in the cloud. And it's a dictionary lookup that you can put information into and retrieve it from. And it's a great way to handle session state for your Kentico Xperience sites. Session state is critically important. And when you have multiple instances of code that can possibly scale out, you need to consider where that session lives. And Azure Redis Cache is where I recommend putting it. It's a very inexpensive resource, and it's a very fast way to handle session. And this makes it so that, like, if I log into a website and I'm running an instance in primary, I maybe can see my profile, I do an action, and as I keep clicking through to next on like an e-commerce shopping cart, my user stays with that page and that action. And if we have more than one instance, because we're scaling out for performance needs, if we didn't have session state and maybe it was only in process, like the default out of the box configuration, that could get lost. And maybe I'd bounce between one instance or another, and suddenly I'd refresh a page and there'd be nothing in my shopping cart if we didn't take care of session state. Again, kind of an extreme example, but that's what that does. The next one is the external storage. This is the place to store media file items. Because again, media libraries in Kentico Xperience can be large, maybe 10 gigabytes or more I've seen. You don't want to have multiple copies of these things running around. It's nice to get the media library out of the local file system that would be part of the app service and into a blob storage container, or external storage as Kentico calls it. And that's the next part of scalability. Because again, if we start doubling up admin tool or live sites, we don't want to copy 10 gigabytes over and over and over of PDFs and images. We'd really maybe only rather have one copy of those things, maybe two, depending on how we want to do it. But generally, that's what you're going to need. And then the other two are just kind of helper components or resources, application insights and Key Vault. I'll talk about that in a second. So this diagram would get you scalability to handle more performance, okay? And it would be step 2 of the journey to high availability. And you might be saying, Brian, how would I do that? The first one, Azure Redis Cache, super simple. It's a Nuget package and a couple lines in the web config. That is totally documented at the excellent Experience documentation that's out there. There's a link to it at the top of the slide. That's where I'd recommend going and getting it, and you'd be fine, right? Super easy. Hopefully, it doesn't need more explanation than that. The second component, the external storage, that's a little bit more interesting. I've seen developers in DevNet, in Slack, they struggle with external storage. Even myself, I've struggled with this in the past. So what I did at my blog at McKeiver.com is completely write up a screenshot by screenshot, step-by-step guide for how to implement external storage that would make up that component that I talked about. That's a great resource. Go check it out at McKeiver.com. You can search for that, or it might be a link on my homepage if I get to updating it soon. Great resource, and shameless plug to go check out my blog where there's lots of Kentico Xperience tips and tricks, okay? And if you're going to do that and you're going to implement external storage, one more pro tip I have for you is to use a tool that's called Azure Storage Explorer. It is a free tool that allows you to, from your Windows workstation, look into a blob storage container, see what files are there. You can actually even upload files. This might help you out if you need to migrate from not using external storage to using external storage, because there's a step where you have to copy your media library out of the file system and into Azure. This is the tool to use to do it. And you can actually use it to troubleshoot, are things working or not. So that link is actually the highlighted letters there. Most people don't know about this, which drives me crazy, but I couldn't live without this tool, and you shouldn't either. Okay. And when you have those two things in place and you come look at the app service in the Azure portal and you talk about scalability, because maybe you have to have a high performance month of, you have a big campaign and you have 100,000 users coming all at once, you can simply go to the scale out area of your app service, and there's this little toggle for instance count. If you have the other things I've mentioned set up, you can click next and update it to 2 instances, and suddenly you have a complete copy of your website. It will work great, and it will handle a lot more traffic load for you with only a little bit of configuration. There's even ways to automate how some of this happens, but generally the manual move works just great, okay? And that's what gets you scalability. After that, the other 2 components I mentioned were application insights. It's like a monitoring tool. It's actually a great way to understand how the system is performing, and is there enough traffic that warrants the need for high availability. It's almost basically free. It's very easy to add in. It's a great way to actually see the overall health of your app. If there's issues, if it's slow, this is the first place to go. It's something that's a great telemetry tool. In fact, you can even actually redirect the Kentico event log to be events inside of application insights. And I have a blog post on my blog on how to do that as well. So lots of cool things there. Key Vault is the last one when it comes to scalability. And this is actually not necessarily for scalability. This is just a best practice. I see a lot of people put secrets in their web configs in repos that have like SA passwords. That is a big no-no in today's world. So I really recommend adding Azure Key Vault into the solution. It's a very simple place to store secrets. You get it out of your GitHub repos. It gets it out of your local machines. And it just makes things easier and a lot more secure. So I definitely am all in on using an Azure Key Vault. And there's, I think, some documentation around how to do that. And maybe I'll write a blog post about that too. But definitely highly recommended. So those things have got us to scalability. But we still haven't quite reached high availability with all those performance things. And what we actually need is a way to figure out how to handle what if there is a problem and how to handle having maybe different ways to react to events or maybe downtimes. And the way you do that in Azure is with a door, as this is showcasing. That's the definition of a door on the screen. And when Azure looks at that and says, you know what, we need to provide a door to where traffic goes from the internet to our websites as a proxy, that's called Azure Front Door. And Azure Front Door is the resource where high availability starts to really become available and open up. It's something that looks a little bit like this. You kind of define your domain as the front end inside of Azure Front Door. It can have a private name and the actual public, like www name if you want, but you start with a private one as this is showing. You then connect it to what are called backend pools, which are actually the pool of resources that make up like your website and maybe a secondary instance of your website. But once you have Azure Front Door set up, and there's definitely more steps involved here. I don't have enough time in this talk to go through every single step, but I wanted to cover the overview. It's a little bit like a load balancer or traffic manager. It's actually also a web application firewall. So there's some other benefits, which we'll talk about later. But generally, this is the part where you start, and then your solution looks like this. So we've taken the scalable version of our Azure PaaS resources. We've duplicated them into a primary group and a secondary group. And the important thing to look at is on the right-hand side of the screen. Notice that we've deployed maybe the primary group to the East US region, and we have a secondary failover group to Central US or West Coast or Europe even. And the smart thing that Azure Front Door does for us is it knows where these pools live. You configure them to talk to it, and it flows the traffic one way while everything's working and everything's performing well. But if there's a problem, if there's a slowness issue, if it just flat out goes down, Front Door is smart enough to then direct the traffic to the secondary version. Maybe all of the East US resources are out, like that's happened once or twice, and I think in my life with Azure. Automatically, you can push to that other region where there probably wouldn't be another issue because generally there's not cross-region issues. And that's how it works. Front Door is the smart brain, the controller of the situation. You might ask, hey, Brian, how's it smart enough to do that by itself? And here's the trick. It's actually not. If we zoom in a little bit on the diagram, there's a step where you have to add some code into your application to do what's called a health check. Because Azure Front Door has probes or health probes that need to talk to your application to understand, is it healthy or not? And it's a simple internal route that you have to set up in your live site, maybe your admin tool, but generally more your live site. And it responds with, am I good? Yes, yes, yes. It just keeps asking all the time. It actually asks quite a bit. And when it responds with a good yes, Front Door keeps the traffic coming through. But if it responds with a no or a failure or a slowness, that's the thing that the health probe goes, oh, it's not healthy. Stop shooting traffic to primary, move it to secondary. And that's really actually how it works. So to do that, we have another Nuget package to the rescue. That's something that you just add in, and it kind of just works in the nice. That's one of the nice things about the .NET Core, solution and .NET 6 solution is there's all these tools that are just there for us. So we just have to use this library, again, built by Microsoft, and it has the middleware coding examples in there. You just basically say use health checks and configure the route you want to respond to. And it basically gives you this ability that at your website, whether it's localhost or www.mcbeav.com, it responds with healthy. And it's a very simple 200 response. That's what this package does, and that's how Front Door works. And that would then give you a highly available solution in Azure PaaS. If we look back to, again, this diagram, those things have now accomplished our goals. And I think that's pretty cool because we haven't done a ton of work ourselves, and we're using some built-in resources. All right. So there's some benefits to that, of course. I didn't talk about all of them, but Azure Front Door is, again, it's a web application firewall, prevents against DDoS. It does load balancing, traffic routing. It does the probing, and it does a couple other things as well. You can do some special route configuration. There's other benefits of just being in Azure App Services. One of them I didn't have quite enough time to talk through, which is my favorite actually, is the idea of slots inside of an Azure app. Well, I should say inside of an Azure App Service, to say it correctly. You can actually have an A and B or blue and green slot and deploy code to the live environment and test it at a private URL before it goes live. And when you're ready and that test passed, you can click a button, and with almost zero downtime, you can swap the slot to the true production blue slot versus the green slot. So basically, there's a way to have high availability and almost zero deployment downtime with using this infrastructure and setup. And I think that's pretty darn cool. Now, is it for everybody? Probably not. There are some cons to this. It's something that there's definitely a cost involved. All those resources that I showed on those diagrams, they each have a pricing tier. Most of them you're not going to want to use the free tier. There's a cost to these things, and that's something to be aware of. There's almost a duplicate cost because we're actually running two things at the same time. We're running two databases, and we're using the replication ability that Azure SQL has to do that. But honestly, it's on the con list here, right? Anytime anyone's ever touched SQL replication, it's not my favorite thing. It can cause problems. However, it does work really well in Azure, right? They've got it working better than, a lot better than having two on-premise SQL servers to worry about replication. That's like my least favorite thing. And again, you may not need this. As I said, if you're just a company that has a simple marketing site and there's just not a ton of traffic, you probably don't need high availability. But if you're a nationwide retailer in e-commerce where every second equals sales, maybe you do want to have something like this because it's actually a fantastic way to, again, have the most uptime, be resilient, and almost zero downtime deployments. So, but there's a lot of work to make it happen in terms of cost and setup. But once you're there, it is a joy to work with. So I kind of want to close with, I hope you've seen that using Azure PaaS with Kentico Xperience is a great way to achieve the goals that we've talked about. Honestly, it's a great way to do it without a lot of headache, in my experience, compared to the old days. So I'm a big fan of this solution. It works well. I've seen it. I've used it. I really enjoy it. And Azure has some other capabilities that are very cool as well. So with that, that's everything I have. I hope you learned a little bit today about how Azure works with Kentico Xperience. Do you have any questions? This is definitely a way to get a hold of me. My email's there. You can follow me on Twitter at McBeav. Check out my blog at mcbeav.com or even hit bizstream.com. Again, we are Kentico Xperience Gold Partners. We do it all the time, and we love to hear from you. So with that, I just want to leave you with this. Make the most of this conference. Engage with people in the live chat. Go visit the sponsor booths. Talk to us in the event chat. That will make it more enjoyable for everyone. Or maybe if you're here watching, you can have a beer with me after this as well. So hope you all have a good day. Hope you enjoyed the session. And thank you very much for listening to High Availability with Azure for Kentico Xperience websites.